It was good to work with Airly Press and learn in the process. It's a you volunteer for 3 years to be a part of the press, and so it was a good learning experience. This is the cover. I will start with somewhere near the beginning. Um, this is called Beast of Burden. My father worked in lumber mills in the Western Oregon, and so this is the ground that this comes from. Beast of Burden. My father was one of the oxen that pulled Northwest lumber mills from the days of the Jippo and homegrown baron to the era of international conglomerate. In those rough-cut days, the boss lived up the hill, the kids went to the same school, and money spilled on the rainy slope that ran from the view to the slough. The little outfits got bought up, squeezed out, bankrupted, or burned. Labor was still at the gate when the fiscal office moved to Portland or Seattle, then Atlanta, and the money sailed to a warm climate. Father took early retirement with half pension and bad lungs. He was one of the lucky ones. That was in the 50s and 60s when there were a lot of these union wage jobs for people who were laborers. And those, of course, dried up for many reasons, overcutting and our concern with the forests. And so those jobs evaporated rather suddenly and left a lot of people in crisis. But when I was growing up, I grew up essentially on the Umpqua River, spent many days there in, on, or around the river. And this poem is when my brother was 14 and I was about 10. And we could swim like fish, so we could take the boat out anytime we wanted. This is called We Didn't Tell Him We Were Neighbors. Night is a neighbor, sort of a neighbor. Night's land ran to the middle of the river. Night said so, had the deed from 1867, and by God meant to keep anyone from trespassing on the rights his grandfather had claimed. It was good land, too, loam and leaves laid down over thousands of years. We had anchored where the North and South Forks come together with other boats below a wide riffle. Mid-morning, we discovered we'd left the pecan at home. So, with some trepidation, we threw out the anchor rope float and nudged the boat onto a sand spit around the bend. Quiet as we could, my brother and I lined up to relieve ourselves. Halfway through, a voice came over the bank. "You don't see me driving to town to piss on your lawn, do you? You haven't noticed me pissing on your porch, have you?" We didn't answer, just finished as fast as we could. "I've a mind to blow those little peckers off." He loomed above us, double-barreled shotgun protruding from his hip. We shoved off, started the motor, and headed around the bend. "Next time I will, by God, you can count on it." Then the boom of the shotgun. We both ducked involuntarily. We reattached the anchor rope, fished another hour, and left before next call. We moved up the river, up on the North Umpqua, and I went to high school in a place called Glide. A few of you have been there and perhaps even gone up the river. It's a beautiful river. Maybe got your fishing pole out. But this is when I was in high school, Daphne. Daphne arrived at her grandmother's down the road from us the summer I was 17. I heard that it was to get her away from bad influences, somewhere in the source of all bad influences, California. She found me within a month. She talked about Ray Charles and the Beach Boys. The first time I kissed her, that I knew that some of those bad influences had come along with her. There was no push on my part when she pulled me on top of her on the bench seat of my father's pickup. What rang in my ear, thank goodness, was the voice of our health teacher who taught us precious little else. Some of you boys will be daddies before you graduate. And you older boys, 15 will get you 20. This is sort of some of the pain that's in the book as well. I'll read a few of those. Nowhere to hide. Music comes down 7th Street, close and fierce, blowing names off signs, jumping into people's blood. It is like fire. The closer it gets, the more uncomfortable you feel. There is no sweet harmony in these juicy notes. No. No jive gimmicks, no marching, waltzing, sashaying, two-stepping, chanting, lindy hopping, no syncopated invitation, no. It is born of clanging metal and gunfire, trash cans banging down alleys, cries of desperation in back rooms, bedrooms, and boardrooms. It is pain singing. Well, I got a notice from the draft board in 1965 that I was due for a physical. There's no way you can avoid those unless I come up and join Al, which I thought about very seriously. Douglas County was a place where it was predominantly libertarian. Leave us alone. And at the same time, very patriotic. So they'd go and fight in any war that happened to come along by way of the government. So it was sort of interesting to grow up there. This is called Fort Lewis, 1967. The enlisted man's bar, a quarter in the jukebox, and a chorus rises. We all live in a yellow submarine. Absurd, beyond absurd in the beery air. National Guard, Reserve, drafted and enlisted, voice the crazy trap we find ourselves in. The wheel spins, the needle clicks, those whose number will be called this time. And we live beneath the waves. What century are we in? Have we invaded Persia? Will we massacre Cheyenne today? Every one of us has all we need. There is a brief, still moment. Then someone drops in another quarter. We all live in a yellow submarine, and we hold on for the dive. I ended up joining the National Guard, and partly because Wayne Morris was our senator, our National Guard didn't get called up and sent to Vietnam. But we did change to training for those radicals in the street, which were, of course, us in a different uniform, you know. This is called Much Improved. Hardly anyone dies of typhoid fever anymore. We can send our sons to war without complaint. Lice are quickly dispatched. and no one freezes to death. We have piles of antibiotics. The broadsword wounded aren't left in the field to die with others rotting around them. Of course, there are more bombs and bullets, but morphine is readily available. We can usually save a soldier whose limb is blown off. Yes, things are much improved. We can send more daughters up to the front. They have the right. Soldiering is still a good option for the poor. We're working on pills for madness, more medications to calm the nerves, and we'll get a handle on this suicide business. Yes, we will. This is the title poem, Ordinary Gravity. Some say they see angels at the event horizon. Others that anything that we see is a projection, a hologram somehow created by us to step into and believe. The old scenarios of judgment, heaven and hellfire taught us about symbols, that we get wisdom aslant. We look for soul in the great karmic tides, in the river that never ceases to run, in the dust left by elephant gods. For those who have touched the cold clay of their mother or killed and slaughtered a calf, there is a darkness no lens can pierce. Some are satisfied knowing that our molecules will go on to enrich the thin life of this planet, held in a vast sky that tells us everything in a language we are just beginning to learn. And this is the last poem in the book, called October Leaves. Sweet gum leaves fall to the desperate lawn. The porch needs sweeping. I sit in an old wicker chair watching ducks come and go on the pond. These turning leaves carry me to a time I discovered a wild freedom. That first year in college, after selling band instruments and working the hospital swing shift, leaving parents who saw college as a foreign land, and their work world, that sore-back labor world, where if you wanted to eat, you cut timber, hauled logs, stacked lumber, or sold it. That world where you bucked hay bales and picked beans or fruit, always for somebody else. And here I was with a life outrageously open in drifts of campus maple leaves, exuberance dancing in my blood, flying and falling in each startling moment. How does one welcome such a guest? What does one do? Freedom is not easily held onto, but it kept a little piece in my pocket, past the rules and requirements, past basic training and mistakes in loving. For that time, I could recognize it, offered on the wind. Mallards arrive over the rooftop and settle on the water. I was one of several friends from the Roseburg Glide area of the Umpqua Valley who went up to Oregon State, and we were all first generation college students, and so we kind of formed a cadre of wandering around, trying different classes on, and listening to very interesting talk that we wouldn't have gotten otherwise. I'm going to read a few poems from Daybreak on the Water. Like I said, I spent a lot of time on the Umpqua River, It was a mentor and a third parent. This is called Copeland Creek. Long before they were paved, we drove the stutter of washboard roads pounded endlessly by log trucks, 30 miles up Adam's bony ribs to a paradise called Copeland Creek. We camped where the creek spills into the North Umpqua. I was 8 years old and the river sang. After sleeping in the river's voice, my father, his friend, and I put fly rods together. Mine a 9-foot bamboo with mended tip and casting reel full of fly line. We waded pool to pool, side to side, the flash of silver filling our creels. There were pools too deep, so the closest man would grab my free hand and pull me half swimming to the next gravel bar. Back at camp, morning light still filtering through fir needles. Mother tended Dutch oven biscuits as trout curled in the frying pan. There's a part of me still there, surrounded by enormous trees, the river singing me alive. Copeland Creek is now considered a spawning stream, so you can't go in and catch those little trout anymore. They were little fat mountain rainbows that I don't think I've ever eaten a better trout. After work, he would come home, excuse me, he would come home with the shape of welding goggles impressed around his eyes. We would throw our fly rods in the back of the truck and head up Little River with a foot of daylight hanging in the west. Not much was said on the way. An early June day sliding beneath us, the water singing, father upstream, me down, jumping, wading, fishing the channels. It was all we needed. We didn't have a lot of deep conversations, but we had some great afternoons. Excuse me. Industry. Crystal was about 45 when she started to make those crazy things. Lived across the pasture from us on a little hill. She'd always been good with the sewing machine, clothes for the kids, pillows, shawls, little cloth boxes at Christmas. But then these strange, odd, peculiar things started to show up at the county fair. Dogs with alligator heads, snakes with human heads and belled tails, a turquoise starfish with a moon face, 4 lifelike kittens on a sofa cushion. A store owner uptown bought a few and put them in his window. One of the drummers took a couple to a show in Denver. In 3 years' time, she had half a dozen neighbors sewing for her in a converted barn. The following year, her husband, Bob, leased out his pasture and hayfield. We started to see Bob down at the river in a new boat. We'd anchor by him at the forks and shoot the breeze, the warm sun washing over us. The meal. Spirit made me flesh in this river-walking land, among the deer dance people, singing the dreams awake. Flesh made me spirit in this dream of bone and water, to slip this thin skin and walk between. The platters passed from hand to hand, each tongue tasting the river in the salmon's flesh. monsters all. I'm fishing around little grass-tufted islands, land a couple, keep a few, keep one, when I haul in a 10-inch rainbow. Taking out the hook, I see a little head down its gullet. This greedy fish hadn't digested one meal before going after the artificial bug I offered. Heron, egret, otter, merganser, kingfish trying to swallow a fish the size of its head, and me, a bunch of marauders on this dappled stream. I slit it open, feed the guts and half-swallowed fish to the crawdads. Up at the house, I fry it for lunch. This is called The Last Time. My father has emphysema and a bad heart valve the last time we fished the mountain water. He knows the valve can go at any time, refuses replacement surgery, says he's had enough of that. I take the bridge to the other side and he slides down the near bank. Looking into the pool between us, I can see trout hanging in the current. I watch my father catch a fish before I get to where the rapids tail out. It's a big river with fish holding near the current's edge, behind rocks and under shadows, waiting for life to deliver what it will. It will be several years before the oxygen tank is necessary, and this communion with the river is a daydream. So we fish our separate sides of the same water. I catch a few small ones and throw them back. Two keepers in my creel as I head for our rendezvous. He makes it up the bank, stopping now and then to breathe. And I see his 4 fine rainbows. He has bragging rights today. After he couldn't fish anymore, I would go over and visit them and try to catch wherever I was living. When I was living in Corvallis, I would go up the South Santiam because they lived over by sisters. And I would stop on the South Santiam and try to catch enough trout for dinner for all of us. Trout was like a part of our forever communion. Al, one of your river poems reminded me of this poem. Al, it's called Stone. Like water runs around the rounding stone, time swims around the smoothing self that polished becomes nothing but shine. And this is the last poem. It's called Cable Crossing. And there's a spot up in North Umpqua where there's a cable that goes across the river where fish and game people or forest service or somebody can haul a light load across the river without going all the way around. Cable crossing. I stop at the cable crossing hole when light just touches the top of the canyon. I slip down the bank under the trees to liquid emerald. I roll cast to rings of rising trout. They pay little attention to my muddler or mayfly. I set the rod down, this deep green world turning to magic at twilight. I give in. The fish jump and roll as I breathe the living air. I will be here at 17 and 70, life washing through me, this small infinity. Thank you.